Hey everyone, welcome to this week's episode of the Elevate Your Week podcast. Today we're here with Marie Oyler. She is a registered mental health counselor intern. She has her own counseling company called Thrive and Rise Counseling. How you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
No problem. No problem. So today I want to talk to you a little bit about where you kind of started your business, what kind of led you, because I know previously you were in education, and you were teaching at schools, and then you kind of pivoted a little and went into the counseling field. So I'm really curious to hear about like your journey to what led you to make that change in your career.
Yeah, so that story is definitely one that is very heartfelt for me. I did teach high school English and reading, and I really loved teaching. I was good at it. I connected well with the students, but it got to be a point which, our topic today of boundaries could definitely lend well to this, but I got really burnt out because a teacher's life is just very stressful and
Never ending.
bureaucracy. I don't know if you have kids in the system, but the FSA replaced the FCAT at the last year that I was in teaching, and it was just like pure hell. And I was really unhappy. And so at the end of that year, or probably before the end of that year, I kind of decided that something had to give. And so I was really kind of distraught for a really long time trying to think about what my path was, because I had gone to school to be an educator. I liked at the core of what I did being a teacher, and I liked connecting with the students. And so it kind of felt failure-ish to decide that maybe this wasn't right for me, but I wasn't mentally and physically well. And so I realized that I really loved connecting with the students. A lot of times they would come and tell me all of their problems every day anyway. And there was a lot, especially I taught the lower level students who had a lot of at-home challenges and everything like that. And so I realized that before I could teach them the content that they needed to know, which was English, which isn't always well received, there was just so many emotional boundaries that they had to being able to be in that classroom. And so mixed with my own mental health journey, I just really decided that I connected with that path. And so I was also at a crossroads. I was like, late 20s, not married, didn't have children. And so I was like, well, if I'm going to go back to school, now would be a time to do that. And so I kind of went towards the mental health field. And then, I did part-time so I could, so I worked full-time at Full Sail University, actually, which kind of kept me connected to the education world, while also kind of bridged the gap because I was kind of like working with students in a counseling kind of perspective with their academics and stuff like that. And so kind of that was a good fit. And then I eventually graduated and decided to start my own business in the middle of a pandemic, actually right before. So it's kind of how I got here.
I mean, there's never really a better time to do it because, especially now with the pandemic and everybody is kind of, in quarantine, mental health has become like such a bigger issue than I feel like it has been in the past few years with everybody being so isolated.
I feel like it's being talked about more too, which is really awesome. Yeah. People are realizing that there's a lot that being stuck at home can highlight for you that you might have been able to ignore, just kind of, hustling, bustling, and that sort of thing.
Absolutely. And did you so when you were, making this transition into the mental health field, what kind of, challenge did you have, like any mindsets that you came over from like your education standpoint, like, and your whole, education background when you were coming into the mental health field? Was there like a lot of changes that you had to make in order to kind of adapt yourself to that new environment?
It's a yes and no. The whole structure of at least my program for, mental health counseling And some of the other ones in at least the Orlando area, I've had friends, but they really formulate that program so that the things that you encounter and the work that you do is really meant to challenge your own beliefs and your own systems. I would say that highlighting and becoming more self-aware of your issues is a really big component of becoming a mental health counselor, because you're listening to other people's vulnerabilities and pain, and you have to be able to be present for that person. But in that regard too, like if something that comes up totally goes against your value system, or it's triggering to you, or for example, when I was in my practicum, I was like, this lady sounds like my mom. I don't know how I feel about that. You have to be able to kind of hold that back, and you can't be like, biased in that regard. And so part of the process of, becoming a counselor is really understanding yourself so that you can work through those things. And then a lot of that came up for me too, not necessarily having to change my mindset, but kind of looking back, there were some children that I taught that I maybe would have treated differently. There was this one kid, and I will never forget him because he just wanted to aggravate the shit out of me on the regular. And I might have been a little bit more compassionate about that and really understood, because I kind of knew what his home life was like. And
Yeah.
so, maybe the way I would have given detention or discipline, or, I might have changed the game a little bit, or a lot of it. So I really reflected in that, because I feel like as a teacher, you do have to deal with all of that stuff. You know what I mean? You don't get to
Yeah.
just come in and teach English. You're kind of combating all of the defense mechanisms and whatever that these kids come to you with. But you're not equipped to really handle that. You were taught to teach English or math or history. You're not really given a lot to deal with, like the emotional
Yeah.
needs of the people that are in front of you. So,
Which I feel like is really important, considering you're dealing with, kids that are at such an impressionable age, and, anything they see or hear, is very like adaptable to them. And they're just constantly feeding off all this information and things going on around them. So they become, I guess kind of, a product of their environment, so to speak. And I think that's a really good point. Having that, like, mental health background when you're working with kids that are that impressionable in that age, really helps in the way that you, like, kind of, I guess, learn to teach them, and the teaching style that you kind of have to go into in order to be able to educate them. And you kind of touched on this a little bit, where you kind of were at that crossroads where you, like, you didn't know which direction you wanted to go. And, working in like those kind of fields as a educator, what did you find was, once you moved into like this mental health aspect, was it something a little more that you felt like you were on the right path now? Like,
yeah, I think that it kind of wavers sometimes as we deal with certain things. I mean, as you enter into something new, you're kind of always like, is this the right path for me? Some days I feel really great about it. Some days I'm like, maybe I should just throw in the towel. But I think that when I actually get a chance to like work with a client and really see their, I guess, effort or appreciation, or them working through something, it definitely reignites my passion. And I definitely think that no matter what, I am drawn to helping professions. And with teaching, sometimes it felt insurmountable, because at one point I had 35 children in my class, which is also another problem that we'll get into.
it's a
But
big problem.
how can you, right. And so one of the things they always harped was like making sure all your students are engaged, making sure everyone's on task. And I'm like, if 35 kids are in my class, and I taught high school, and a lot of the, that was like an upper level class, I'm like, if they wanted to revolt, there's like literally nothing I could do. So getting all of those people engaged and on task, like, was a difficult thing. And so working more one-on-one with people, I feel like, is definitely more my speed, because you can just work with that one person or couple or family, but you're definitely narrowing down your focus. And so that definitely makes it more manageable for me.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely, and continued education even for yourself. New styles and
Hmm.
techniques and ways of handling different traumas and the different aspects of the mental health spectrum. I think education kind of falls side by side with it. And when
Oh
you go
yeah.
into like you're balancing your boundaries, what were some, because I know you kind of touched on that a little bit. You had to like kind of figure out your own boundaries when you're in school because it's constantly like a 24/7 thing. It never ends. You work all day,
Hmm.
you teach the students, you go home and you're working, grading papers, getting ready for the next day. I could imagine that it's very difficult, especially once you get married and have kids, to be able to separate those kinds of things and find balance in that, professional and personal life. And what were some of the things that you did to kind of be able to separate those two things?
Yeah, well, it's definitely worked out more so now than it did as a teacher. Um, like you said, constantly you get to teach all day and you get like an hour for a plan period, and then you have to go home and grade all those papers and lesson plans. And I remember I would have like literal anxiety attacks on Sunday. Like if anybody asked me to do anything that took more than 2 hours, like I freaked out. And so you had to have those firm boundaries, but I didn't. And so I got really burnt out. And then you have the whole summer off. So you're literally like, what do I do? And not doing anything, even though, you could have worked on that. And then school starts and you're back to 100%. But with mental health,
And it's
and
hard.
especially I have a young son now. And it's definitely, I've had to make the choice to, um, I work part time so that I can be home a little bit more with my son. Um, I have a work phone that I don't even look at on the days that I'm at home, mostly because I don't get a break from chasing him around. But really, kind of creating those separate lives has been one thing that I've really had to maintain to create that boundary. And I've been lucky enough to do that because with the teaching job, you kind of have deadlines, you have office hours that you're supposed to be there, so you have to be really firm in creating that for yourself. But with mental
Yeah,
health counseling and
and
having my own business, I have the liberty of creating that for myself.
And that's definitely one of the benefits that I love about like kind of running your own business, so to speak, is that you kind of get a little bit more of those like liberties and freedoms of being able to, kind of separate your personal and
Mm-hmm.
business life. Cause I do the same thing, for a while I had like my work phone and like that was it. And then it would go in the drawer at the end of the day and I wouldn't look at it till the next day. But then somehow, they always find your phone numbers and they're still contacting you directly. So it becomes very difficult, especially like when you have your email on your phone, it becomes very difficult to disconnect. And even more so in like the time of social media, being able to disconnect to find like those times when you should be working and you shouldn't be working. I mean, that was definitely the catalyst to like my burnout about
Mm-hmm.
2 years ago, where I just didn't stop. I was constantly going. I literally work from 7 a.m. until 7 p.m., go home and work till like 4 a.m. And it was just like a perpetual cycle that
Mm-hmm.
never ended until I kind of had to take a little more control of it. And it was hard to find that balance even then because then you're
Mm-hmm.
sitting within the back of your mind, you're like, shit, did I take care of this? Is this client going to contact me? And you're kind of just like, always on edge and you always like expecting that bad news to come or expecting something to come up that's going to kind of throw a wrench in your day. So separating the two was kind of nice for a while it lasted. And then it's just a matter of keeping that routine up, which I can be terrible at sometimes.
Yeah, and consistency is key. One thing that I always say with boundaries is that you really have to evaluate what your limits are and also what your values are. And so when you have a clear understanding of what those two things are, then you create the boundaries out of that. And when you have what I call like the why behind it, it's easier to fight for it. So for example, like I could easily work full time or, really come home, or one thing too is like I don't like to see clients late at night. having those evening appointments, which are more available for people and would probably be a little bit more lucrative, but I want to spend that time with my family. And so that family value piece for me is super important. So even though like sometimes when I'm in the office, I get really like business zoned and like, yeah, I want to do all these things. At the end of the day, when I come home, I'm like, oh
Mm-hmm.
no, this is what's important to me. And so defining why you're setting a boundary and why you need to create balance is just as important as creating it, because then it kind of gives you the drive to practice it and to be more consistent when you otherwise might say like, forget it, I'm just going to work till 4 a.m. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's definitely a big flaw of mine that I just like. I always have trouble disconnecting. So I do
Mm-hmm.
that quite often, and like in the sense of like overworking and burnout. What are some of the things that you found that kind of work to help alleviate some of that burnout?
And so when you were saying like having like, oh, what word you just used, but like wanting to always just kind of keep going, and recognizing, and that goes with the knowing your limits, knowing that you're not the Energizer bunny, like you need to take a break. So a lot of times with burnout, it's because you're not observing like even the basic physical needs that you have. Like you might really want to keep working till 4 a.m., but you're going to be tired the next day. And then the productivity that you have the next day is not as effective as if you were to have gotten your sleep. Like, are you eating regularly? Are you eating healthy foods? Are you, giving yourself that, those
Mm,
basic needs, as a minimum? Yeah, and those all make a difference. And so like setting boundaries can even mean like I'm going to go to bed by 11 and I'm going to sleep. Even if that's the only boundary, cuz like burnout happens when you're overworked and you've just pushed it to the limit for too long, and then you just don't have anything left to give. And especially in a creative field, like that takes a lot of mental energy, in my opinion, to be creative. It's not like a rote job where you're just filling in data. Like it comes from the heart, and without having like proper energy to do that, like, are you producing the best work that you can be, which then might lead into like, feelings of guilt or frustration, and then depression, anxiety, like it just is a spiraling effect.
yes, I can literally relate to pretty much everything you just said, at least at some point in my career of like, doing weddings and photography and stuff like that. And one of the biggest
Mm-hmm.
things like I always had issues with, and I know a lot of people that work in the creative industry, and it's like you said, when you're working in like a creative field, you kind of have to practice self-care even more so that you can keep that like creativity alive and flowing. And so I found
Mm-hmm.
that one of my favorite books that I've read recently was it's about managing your day-to-day and building routines for like creative people to keep your mind focused and sharp. And one of the things that I pulled from there that like I always try to do now is first thing in the morning, I never do anything that's like, your monotonous day to day stuff like emails or, um, you know, social media, stuff like
Mm-hmm.
that. I don't touch any of that. And like all my focus is on in the first part of the morning is anything creative. Um, because usually that's
Mm-hmm.
when I'm at my most productive, when I'm not bothered a million times and being thrown around in like a million different directions. I can actually sit and like concentrate on stuff and be able to put out my best work. However, I find that I'm a rare type of person where I'm more productive off of 4 hours of sleep than I am 8 or 10 hours of sleep. Um, And I found that,
Mm-hmm.
when I do get 8 to 10 hours of sleep sometimes, like I'll get up in the morning and I'll just have like no energy to do anything because it's almost like I overslept. But I think it goes back to that whole idea of the fact that I haven't like quite built the routine yet behind it. And that's why, because I'm like, some days I'm getting 4 hours of sleep. Some days I'm getting 5 hours of sleep. Some days I'm getting 10. And I think, not having that built in routine can kind of affect creativity, so to speak.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think that idea of like routine helps creativity might throw some people off because, creativity is
Yeah.
so like, it doesn't have, those bounds. But it really does help because you're regulating something and you're providing those expectations. And a lot of time with burnout or, with feeling certain mental illness or, just anxiety, it becomes chaotic feeling. And so the more that you introduce that structure, the more that you can have those expectations and then thrive more. And then going back to your sleeping, again, just knowing your limits, like, that you can function off a 5. I know that I can't, like I cannot. And knowing those times when you um, work the best too. It's like having a lot of self-awareness into your
Yeah.
own lifestyle is very helpful for creating that structure for yourself. Like, I'm not saying get 8 hours of sleep, eat or drink your 64 ounces of water, eat 3 balanced meals. Like, what your life is like. And one thing that I've been, with myself and with clients is instead of working against whatever your natural flow is, like, figure out how to work with it. So like, if like you're functioning better in the morning, like schedule that accordingly. Like for me, I'm more like a midday person, so I wouldn't
Yep.
schedule anything in the morning, anything at nighttime that I need to function and like focus and really have that clarity. So just like having a lot of that self-awareness so that you can schedule it. Like if you're not the person that wakes up early and you're going to say, I'm going to go to the gym 5 days a week at 6:30 in the morning, like you're setting yourself up for failure because that's not who you are, you know?
Been there. Been there. And it's totally like you can kind of mold into that person, because like I used to never be a morning person. Like if I was up before 10 a.m., it was a fucking miracle. And now it's like, every day I'm up at like 6 a.m. and like I'm already
Mm-hmm.
starting my day by 7. I'm already in the office. And it just becomes something that I've kind of like drilled into myself so that I could, because, it's like you said, finding those routines that you already have built and working off of those to kind of develop your own practices and develop like a real routine. I found
Mm-hmm.
personally that I did have to amend some of the things that I was doing because they
Mm-hmm.
weren't some of the best habits. And one of those things was, how I was managing stress. And every week I would look at the next week, and the only thing I would be able to focus on was just all the stress that was coming that week and all the things that I needed to do. And it's really overwhelming when you think of it, in that kind
Mm-hmm.
of a mass, like, um, you know, um, a mass idea. So what are some of the things that, like, cause I know now, like, I can't look at next week and pick up all the bad stuff that I have to do or all the stuff that's going to take me a ton of time and stress me out. I
Mm-hmm.
personally, I have to create like kind of a balance there. So I look at all the positive aspects of the week, all the really good things that I have going on, and all the really boring, business stuff that I got to do that I hate doing, that I don't want to do. And I feel like that kind of creates balance. Is there something that you would recommend that could kind of create that balance so that people, they're not always looking at the stressful parts of their week?
Yeah, the first thing that comes to mind, and you kind of hit on that, is that idea of like a gratitude practice. I feel like that is something that people struggle with. So that idea of like only looking at the negative things is, I would say, pretty common. And so also focusing on like the really awesome things that are going to happen helps to create a mindset of balance. And besides just looking at your work week, like really focusing on like those positive aspects of your life can kind of help you. I'm not going to get into like all of it, but neuroscience suggests that like an active gratitude practice can help change the neural pathways in your brain to start helping you after a while, just like any habit, create that mindset for you to access in the future. And so that kind of creates a different um, avenue of thinking that you'll start, utilizing more. And then again, you mentioned self-care, and I think that is a big component of just all aspects of life. And I think that people think
Yeah.
self-care and they think, I'm going to, get a pedicure and have a bubble bath and drink some wine and sit and
Treat
binge
yourself.
Netflix, which is totally right. And it's totally an aspect of self-care, of course, but even creating boundaries and really doing those things that just take care of you is a form of self-care. And so, like, you created a boundary. I'm not going to look at next week until I have to. So I don't even know what stress lies there. Like, that's a firm boundary. Like, whatever day you say, I'm going to look at that. And then when I do, I'm going to create, I'm going to look at both aspects of it. And so that's a form of self-care, because that stresses me out. I can't do that now
Yeah.
because I don't want that stress right now. On a slight side note tangent that's slightly relatable, but they say anxiety is like the future mental illness. Depression is like the future or the past. So like you're looking at the past on your side, but anxiety is like future focused. And so if like you're looking at the future and you're constantly stressed out, then you need to bring yourself back to like what's happening right now and be, that mindfulness and be present, because like there's always stress around the corner. It's just a reality, especially when you're running your own business and you're
Of course.
busy and all of that stuff. But if you're focused so much on that you're then are disconnected to the present or the joys that life has, and in all of this as well, you kind of lose that purpose of like, why am I even doing this? Like, it doesn't make me happy. And we're in our own business or you're in a creative field because you have a passion about it. And that's supposed to help fulfill you in some way. As you're connected to your passion. And so sometimes we forget about that. So kind of inviting that back in to your life, I think, is important.
Oh, I'm sure. I'm sure. And like when you're thinking, okay, so say for instance, you have a week where, everything just starts going wrong. How do you manage that stress? How do you, say for instance, you're in a relationship and you have a lot of negative things going on in that relationship. How do you manage, that without it affecting your business?
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a hard one, because we are emotional beings by nature, and our emotional experiences tend to override a lot of things. Um, and so with the idea of like distress in your personal life, the easy, simplified, more unrealistic version is create a boundary. Like when you're at work, you're at work. When you're at home, you're at home. The long story answer is that is like, you obviously need to address the personal situation, whether that's, reflecting, taking time apart, whatever the personal situation may be, seeing a counselor individually or a couple, like resolving your personal life, if it's impacting your professional life, like that obviously ultimately needs resolution. But also with that, I would ask yourself, like, how are you being distracted? I remember at one point I was like in a fight with my sister and she was texting me and I would read it immediately and I'd get really triggered. And so in that regard, like I need to put that away if that's what's distracting me. Like, are you accessing social media? Are you available to the problem at all times? And is that what's taking you away from the focus of work? Is it your own like thought process being like fixated on that? And in that regard too, there's methods. I mean, if you are constantly anxious about something, like maybe you just need to like brain dump, journal it out, like write all your feelings and then tell yourself like, I'm setting this aside for now. But finding a way to like make that separation somehow, obviously easier said than done, but kind of being aware
Of
of like,
course.
how is this distracting you?
And when it
Yeah.
comes to, we keep going back to like awareness. And when it comes to just awareness, I love the idea of the gratitude journals and stuff and, kind of putting down like, positive things in your life that can kind of change your mindset and, just make you less stressed, less anxious about the day and a little more prepared, so to speak. But, there are some people who deal with like debilitating anxiety, especially
Hmm.
when it comes to a position where they have to be around people, or they have different projects every week. What are some of the ways that you find is best to deal with things like that, to prepare yourself to go into a situation like that when you can't really avoid it?
Yeah. Well, if you're having like severely debilitating anxiety, then you should be seeing a mental health professional.
Agreed.
Because again, the space for therapy is for you to understand that anxiety. Like, anxiety at its core is that flight, fight, response, and freeze, depending. But that's your body reacting to some sort of a threat. And a lot of times with anxiety, or, obviously we're not cavemen, running from a bear, which would be
Yeah.
like, an active threat against our life. But your mind creates that threat in the same way that your body is reacting to it. And so, um, really understanding what's triggering you and why, is a key to overcoming it in the long term. The other side of that, because I always say there's kind of two aspects of mental health at first for people. It's like symptom relief, but then you
Yeah.
also have to take that deep dive to figure out the why. Why is all this happening? Um, and so the symptom relief aspect of that is coping coping skills of some variety, whether that's deep breathing, some sort of a meditation. A lot of times too with anxiety in the moment, like you might, like I said, it's a future worry kind of mental health issue. And so sometimes preparedness for like, if you have projects and stuff like that, really making sure you're prepared and at your best. Again, that kind of goes back into like even just taking care of your physical needs, like making sure that you're sleeping,
Yeah.
eating, that sort of thing, to make sure that you are prepared to handle it. And then another aspect of it is a lot of times with anxieties, in our minds, there's a lot of thoughts going on, usually some messages that reflect our self-worth or value in some way that we might not even be conscious of. That's just kind of like going on as elevator music, telling you you suck or that you're not going to be good at this or you're going to fail in some way. And so examining
And it's all in your
those and learning how to
subconscious.
identify them. Right. Yeah, it's all back there, and it impacts you so quickly. And so, not to get into a super diatribe of this concept, but there's just kind of the most popular therapeutic um, theory out there, cognitive behavioral therapy, but at its basic explanation has a cognitive behavioral therapy like triangle that kind of says that our thoughts, our feelings, and our actions are all connected in a cycle. And so if you're thinking, I suck, I'm not going to be good at this, then you're automatically feeling dread, you're feeling disappointment, those feelings of shame. So then you're going to kind of act in a way that reflects those feelings, which fuels then your same thoughts, and it just keeps going and going and going. And so in therapy, figuring out what those thoughts are, what those feelings are, how that's related to your actions, can help you break the cycle in some way. And obviously there's like a million different therapy modalities and different ways to access that as well. But, I've always agreed with that because it happens so fast. Like you feel something, you think something, you do something. And by the time, you're aware that it's a problem is most of the time the action. You're like, I keep acting this way and that's just not functional for me, or that's not the way that I want to act. And so
Yeah.
that's usually where it comes to light. And anxiety, it could be like heart
Yeah. And I
palpitations,
can imagine.
breathing, you're retreating, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And that was like a big thing I always had issues with, because like I would get ready to, like, pack all my gear to get ready to go shoot a wedding and having to put together like all the plannings and the timelines and all that stuff. And I would, kind of lose my mind. Like, am I forgetting something? Did I grab everything? Do I have
Mm-hmm.
everything? And then 9 times out of 10, I would forget something stupid like, shit, I forgot to wear a belt. Or I forgot to, bring this card to record with. It's always like little things. And one of the things, and I got to give my wife props for this because she was kind of the person behind that, but it was putting together lists of everything that I need before like an event. So that way I know like I've already gone through this list of everything that I need. It's all checked off. It's all here. So I don't really have
Yeah.
to think about it in the back of my head, like while I'm on my way there. And then it totally just destroys my mindset on the way there. Cause I'm like the entire time rather than, getting myself in the right headspace and the right mindset to go and work for 8 to 12 hours. Instead, I'm spending, my hour and a half car ride, just like, did I forget this? Did I forget this? Did I forget this? Did I forget this? And
Yeah. And
yeah, it
that's
can definitely,
exhausting. And by the time you get there,
yeah.
yeah, by the time you get to your job, you're like freaked out. And there's an aspect of like recognizing our anxious thoughts, and you work towards kind of like reframing them. So you created a tool for yourself so that when you're like, did I forget something? You're like, actually, I checked that list. I checked it twice. Like, I know it's all there. And so that's a reframe for you to be able to shut down that thought and kind of move on.
Yeah, and it's definitely harder said than done, or easier said than done, I should say, because I know she was
Yeah.
telling me that for like years, and I think I just did it like a
Mm-hmm.
couple months ago. So it's been a long
Yeah.
work in
Everything about
progress.
therapy is easier said than done. It definitely takes a lot of work. Just the idea of being like aware of your experience is a lot of work in itself, and then implementing the strategies. Because for some reason we're always resistant to wanting things to be better. A lot of us feel very comfortable even if we're suffering like in that other zone.
Oh, I agree 100%. And it kind of takes me to my next thing, so we as people thrive on, like you do something, say you do something nice and you get something good out of it. It's like the reward system, Um,
Mm-hmm.
and it kind of goes back to what you were saying about like the whole idea of treating yourself, getting your nails done, getting your hair done, whatever you look at as, a treat yourself kind of moment. And what are some things that do you think that people rewarding themselves whenever they achieve something or do something good has a positive outlook on or has a positive effect on uh creating that balance and keeping that positive mindset?
I would say yes and no. So I'm kind of torn on the reward system. I definitely think that if we have things in mind to like comfort ourselves or whatever is definitely a good thing. However, you should, in my opinion, this is just my opinion, I think
Yeah,
it's a better balance to know that you deserve those rewards or treats or whatever, even when you're having a bad week as well. You know what I mean? It's good to reward yourself when you're like,
hmm,
I did really awesome this week. What is something that I really wanted to do? However, what I think that language of reward does is kind of create an environment of withholding if you are not performing the way that you want to. And I think that a lot of times people have unrealistic expectations of what they should be doing from whatever reason that
agreed.
was set up. But if you have these like unrealistic expectations and you're only going to reward yourself when you meet that expectation, but then let's say, you're the one that's not a morning person and you're wanting to go to the gym 5 days a week, like you've gone from nothing to wanting to go to the gym 5 days a week at 6:30, then you're setting yourself up for an unrealistic expectation of what you can do, and thus you'll never get the reward, and then you'll go into a shame spiral. And so just understanding that self-love isn't contingent upon you meeting an expectation. Like you should still build in that time for self-love and what have you, even if you are, you know, having a bad week, and maybe you even need it more. But I think that, you know, definitely rewarding yourself if you're, you know, feeling awesome is great, but you deserve it either way, in my opinion.
I 100% agree with that. And when you're talking about like, you know, rewarding yourself and things like that, like and what was really funny is when you mentioned the whole like going to the gym 5 days a week and you know, making that decision to like kind of motivate yourself. I think that's probably the reason why so many gyms, you know, pre-corona, but so many gyms were so successful, because they would get all these people with these pipe dreams of coming to the gym 5 days a week, and then they wouldn't show up. And then they just keep paying their gym memberships
Mm-hmm.
every month for years at a time. I myself am very, very guilty of it. Up until I think 24-hour fitness just went out of business. So it was leading all the way up to that. But yeah, I'd done the same thing, you know, like we try to set goals, and sometimes they're a little unrealistic. And I think kind of what's helped me at least was creating smaller goals, you know, weekly
Mm-hmm.
goals or monthly goals, and then being able to check those off and see that I have made, you know, some sort of advancement, or, you know, there's progress there. It kind of motivates me to keep moving to get the rest of that list done. But I found that, you know, when I like on a Monday where I sit on a Sunday night and I'm like, okay, this is all the stuff that I need to do on Monday. It's so overwhelming that I can't even sleep. I can't get that out of my mind. So like I go into the next day in dread, because I'm like, oh my God, I got this giant list to do,
Mm-hmm.
and I just don't have the energy or motivation to do it. Um, and I found that, you know, kind of attacking those smaller lists and spreading things out through the week rather than sitting and trying to attack everything in a day has definitely helped my stress level, of, you know, having to come in
Yeah.
and be like, okay, well, I guess we should get started because I got about 15 hours of work to do today. And that would always be like the most
Mm-hmm.
debilitating thing for me. And
Yeah.
one of the things that like I always found was like with friends, you know, like I have friends that want to hang out all the time and want to do stuff. And believe me, I love to go out and, you know, hang out and see people. But with my schedule and, you know, constantly everything changing and things coming up, like I always
Mm-hmm.
find it hard to like separate and create that time for them. Um, and then you have, you know, some friends who are very, very needy and need you to contact them all the time, because otherwise they feel that, you know, you're not there for them or that you're not present. How do you kind of navigate that?
Well, so again, like boundaries is our key word, but similarly to creating that
Yeah.
schedule for your work, like if you know that you want to carve out some time to spend with friends, like include that in your schedule. You know, even if you have to go 2 weeks out or what have you, like build that in and then protect it around, you know, like I can't do that because I have something to do at that time as well. Um, and just kind of
Yeah.
assess like for balance, like you know that you want to kind of get this work done. However, you have social needs as well that will help energize you and give you that time to relax, that then you can go back into work feeling like a little bit more recharged. Um, and as far as like needy friends, I think communication is key. um, and there's something that I had
Yeah.
seen, find it in my little thing here, but just kind of communicating that boundary, but letting them know that it's not about them. So instead of saying something like, you know, like, I can't always talk to you, like, you're really needy, I don't have that time, just say, like, hey, you know, make it about yourself. Like, I know that I'm really busy and I'm sorry that I can't make time for
Yeah.
you, but just know that I do care about you. Um, and I will, you know, reach out, but I just, you know, I can't within this time frame or what have you. They might not understand, but at least you know that you've communicated your truth. And then that person has to evaluate, on their end what they can take out of that. But we can definitely tend to feel guilty with the people that we care about when they push against our boundaries. But again, you're creating a space that functions for you, and needing to protect that energy so that you can go after those goals and those things that you want out of your life. And so sometimes people aren't going to like your boundary, and that's a difficult conversations, but being consistent and communicative and non-aggressive to the best of your ability will allow other people to hear and see that this is a boundary.
Yeah, and that's been one of my biggest things is like trying to find that time where I hate to say it, but like it almost feels like unproductive. But then at the same time, when I actually like follow through with those plans and do it, then it feels very productive. So it kind of has that like, kind of, it's like almost like a double-edged sword. But what I did to kind of combat that was I decided that, I'm going to make time one day a week to reach out to friends, to hang out with people, to socialize myself, so that it's not like every time I'm socializing, it's because I'm in the office working with people. Because I think it's really important, especially to your mindset and being able to, promote positive mental health. Those connections with people and the socializing and not being isolated all the time are such big parts of positive mental health.
Yeah. Even in the mindset of like COVID related like topic of isolation, like I think people realize that those connections that they have, even just seeing other people, being able to get out for a second, are important. And so implying like that lesson to your business, I mean, it's especially workaholics, like maybe you need to reframe it that it is essentially helping your business. It's helping you, especially as a creative, to connect with other people. You never know what kind of inspiration can come from, interacting with people and those people that you care about, and just recognizing that it is ultimately helping you at your job. Like if you can't make that separation, like it is all ultimately productive for you, so that you can be more energized, more inspired to get back to work.
Agreed. Yeah, and that's kind of like where my separation went. And I love what you just said about, you never really know what type of creative inspiration the people in your life might bring. And I think that's a very, very powerfully charged statement. Because it's true, I have people who have been in my life who have been, whether they've been friends for a long period of time or even, a short period of time, who have definitely motivated me and been that positive, person in my life who's helped me develop, as a person and as a, a human. And really, compassion, empathy were like two of the biggest things that, I always had trouble with. And I have these other people now who are in my life who have kind of opened my eyes to things like that. And that's even from like a personal standpoint. That doesn't even really have to do with business. I mean, it does, to a certain extent, but it's not really like, business centric when you think about things like compassion and empathy, and just, understanding other people's situations and stories and where they come from. And I think that's such an important point about what you made and about the changes that, positive people can bring into your life. I also think there's the other side of that, where keeping people who consistently bring negative energy into your life can be draining, and not setting those boundaries can, inadvertently kind of just throw a wrench into whatever you're doing and kind of take you off track. So I think having those, positive people around you is always going to be the best thing to promote, your mindset and well-being, and you being happy, and not so stressed out because other people are making you stressed out.
Yeah. And I think too that's definitely an important distinction, because like especially if you're so busy and you really are carving out that time for the social interaction, like making sure that it is something that will energize you. Introvert, extrovert, they always say like extroverts are energized by people, introverts are, drained by like being with people. But really, I think that's like what you said, like it's the quality of people. And so kind
Yeah.
of wherever you stand on that, like if you're making that time, making sure that you're not going into a situation that is like going to cause more stress. Not that you're just doing all of this for selfish reasons, like I have to get a benefit out of this,
Yeah.
but again, creating that life and how you want it to work. And sometimes that is cutting off toxic relationships that just don't add anything to your life, or definitely take away,
Yeah, and
which
that's
can be an
like
extremely difficult thing to
I could
do.
imagine yeah, it was an extremely difficult thing for me to even say apparently. So I couldn't even imagine doing it. But yeah, it is
Yeah.
very difficult to like, separate from people who do have that negative impact on you, because a lot of times they might not even see it themselves, and then
Oh, yeah.
it could be that conversation that you have with them, that open and honest and direct conversation, while still being, somewhat compassionate to the touchiness of the subject. But I think, some people just don't have self awareness of it. And for you to sit there and in a nice way, just kind of explain to them, what you're feeling and what you're thinking, that can change the mindset and the relationship between two people in a positive way.
Hmm. And then also understanding that if you are going to maintain that relationship, then having those boundaries. You know what I mean? Like maybe you meet up with them, but it's for a lunch that ends and then you guys move on. You know what I mean? If like you really
Yep,
feel like you have to maintain that, creating a space that makes it the least stressful possible to execute.
absolutely. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today. Really
Yeah.
excited for a lot of the stuff that we have going on, and for some future stuff you'll be doing with us. Everyone make sure to check
Yeah.
out Thrive and Rise Counseling. It's thriveandrisecounseling.com, right?
And then Thrive and Rise Counseling on Instagram and I think on Facebook too.
Yes.
Yeah.
Amazing. And yeah, we'll be putting links to
Yeah.
ways for them to get in contact with you should they want to reach out, because I think that's really, really important. Um, and again, if you're obviously, if you're feeling like you need more, immediate mental health assistance, always smart to call 911. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us, and we'll see you soon. Take
Yeah.
care.
I look forward to any of our future endeavors. You too. Bye.